Hello and welcome to the St. John's Clay Collective. This video is all about why and how work gets on the tech support shelf and what you can do to avoid the shelf and get your work back in the kiln. So we do have a pretty strict standard for what work will be able to get in the kiln, and mainly those standards are there so your work doesn't get damaged. So it doesn't damage the kiln shelf it's on. If glaze sticks to the shelf, it's a very time-consuming process in order to scrape the shelves clean to make them usable again. And in some circumstances, the damage is so severe I have to replace the shelf. So in order to avoid all that frustration, we do have to make sure that the pots coming into the kiln are well cleaned and that there is no risk of glaze sticking. So in an example of what I would like to see going into the kiln is at least 1/4 inch of clear unglazed clay all the way around the base and a clear clean bottom. In some instances it might be difficult to tell if you did effectively get all of the glaze off, especially with this wax resist. It's hard to tell if that green is the glaze or the wax. So use clean water, a good clean sponge, and just wipe very carefully, and be sure you also get all the way around the edge cleanly. The wax is not a guarantee that the glaze will not stick, and the wax is just there as an ease for helping clean up, but you still need to wipe. So this is maybe an example of a pot that I don't want to risk putting in the kiln, because as you can see, there's no edge, clean edge at the base. And depending on how thickly it's glazed, this glaze does have a potential to run. And because there's no clearance, even if it runs just a smidge, it will stick to the shelf. And then this person will have to scrape and clean up their pot. And in some instances, it might really damage it. In instances like this, where there is a sweep cutting under, it might be difficult to tell for sure if you did clean far enough up the side of your pot when you've glazed it. So get down low at the table and really look. And if you can't see a clear band of clay unglazed wear at the base, go back and clean a little bit more. In some instances, maybe it's underglaze and it is safe to go in the kiln, but I wouldn't know that. From my perspective, it looks like glaze. So if a pot does have underglaze on it that won't stick, underglaze might act a little bit more like clay and not glass over in the kiln like glaze will. So in some cases, the underglazes that act like clay and don't flux won't stick to the shelf. But I don't know that. I'm loading the kiln, and if you have underglaze that is safe to go in the kiln, you can write a note and leave it in your pot to educate me and help me understand before I load it in the kiln. But if I have an instance like this where that could be underglaze, but I don't know, maybe it's glazed, so I don't want to risk it, I'm not going to put it in the kiln. Anytime you make a lidded container, it's always advisable for them to fire together. As the pots are firing in the kiln, they will shrink and they might warp a little bit. And these micro changes that happen in the pot, if the lid's on with it, they will change with it, and then they'll have a nice good fit coming out of the kiln. So if you're going to fire your work together and it's glazed, you do have to be sure that you've cleaned all the contact points for the lid and the container, so that when it comes out of the kiln, it's not going to stick together. In some instances where the glaze is very thick, maybe the glaze is chipped off and left a bare patch on the work. In those instances, as a courtesy, I will put it back on the tech support shelf, so you will have a chance to fix that damage and get it back in the kiln. I know that it's a super bummer when you're coming to the studio and you expect to get your work back and you find that maybe it's not there, it's on the tech support, you got to try again. but I would really encourage people to educate themselves to get it right the second time and have it go in the kiln, rather than me take the time to clean other people's work. I'm increasing my time and effort to load a kiln, and I'm taking away the benefit of that person learning how to do it right. So in some instances, we might fill out a slip detailing exactly why your work is on the tech support shelf. But I hope this video was helpful and that it gave you a better understanding of how the tech support shelf works, and I will see you in the studio.